Chapter 3. Meanwhile, Chichikov, quite pleased with himself, was already rolling along the high road. As we now know his main preoccupation, it should be no surprise to us to find that he soon became altogether absorbed in it again. The assumptions, estimates, and schemes reflected on his face were evidently pleasant, since in the wake of each there remained a contented smirk. Thus absorbed, he paid no attention to his coachman, who, pleased with his reception by Manilov's servants, was making very sound observations to the dappled side horse on the right. This dappled horse was a cunning one who only made a show of pulling, while the base shaft horse and the left side horse, a chestnut called Assessor, because it had been obtained from some assessor or other, put their hearts into their work so entirely that the pleasure they derived from it could even be seen in their eyes. "So you're trying to be smart, are you? Well, I'll outsmart you yet," Sullivan said, raising himself and fetching the idler a whack with his whip. "I'll teach you, you German seam stitcher. Look at the bay. There's a respectable horse for you. He does his share, and I'll gladly give him an extra measure of oats just because he's a respectable horse. And Assessor here is a good horse, too. Come now, what are you twitching your ears for? You'd better listen to me, idiot. I'll only teach you what's right, you know-nothing. What do you mean crawling along like that?" Here he fetched him another one with his whip, adding, "Ah, you barbarian, you damn Bonaparte," whereupon he urged on all three, shouting, "Get out, my beauties," and flicking them with the whip, now no longer as a punishment, but to show he was pleased with them. Having afforded them this pleasure, he again addressed the dappled horse. "You think I don't see the way you're carrying on? Oh no, if you want people to respect you, you'd better behave properly. Take the landowners where we were. Those are nice people. I'm always glad to give credit. With a good fellow, I'm always friends, always on the best of terms. It's always a pleasure to drink tea or have a bite to eat with him. Anyone will respect a good fellow. Take our master. Everyone looks up to him. Because, you see, he served his country well, and they made him some kind of a counselor." Moralizing thus, Sullivan went off into the most remote abstractions. Had Chichikov been listening, he would have learned many details about his private life, but he was so wrapped up in his own thoughts that it took a loud thunderclap to pull him out of them and make him look around. The whole sky was overcast, and the dusty high road was sprinkled with drops of rain. Finally, there was an even louder, even closer thunderclap, and rain began to pour down as if from a bucket. Coming at a slant, it lashed first at one side of the carriage, then at the other, then, changing its attack and falling straight, it beat down on the top. Finally, it began to spray in on Chichikov, hitting him in the face. This caused him to draw the leather curtains, which had two round openings in them, especially designed for observing the view, and to order Sullivan to drive faster. Sullivan, too, interrupted in the middle of his peroration, grasped that this was no moment of dilly-dally, produced some kind of a gray cast-off from under his seat, donned it, tightened the reins, and shouted to his horses, which were barely ambling along, feeling pleasantly relaxed after his lecture. But for the life of him, Sullivan could not remember whether they had gone past 2 or 3 turns. Trying to remember the road they had covered, he decided that there had been many turns and that he had gone straight past them all. Since, when he must act, the Russian finally does so, without further deliberation, Sullivan simply turned right at the first crossroads, shouting to the horses, "Get out, my worthies," and drove on at full speed without giving much thought to where the road might lead. It looked as if the rain had settled in for a good while. The dust of the road was rapidly being kneaded into mud, and it became harder and harder for the horses to pull the carriage. Chichikov began to worry because Sobokevich's village was still not in sight. By his reckoning, they should have reached it long before. He looked out. All around them it was so dark that it would have made no difference if he'd had his eyes poked out. "Sullivan," he said at last, leaning out of the carriage. "What is it, sir?" Sullivan answered. "Take a look. Isn't the village in sight?" "No, sir, it's nowhere in sight." And Sullivan, twirling his whip, intoned a song that was no song, really, but something very long, which, in fact, had no end. Everything went into it, all the encouragements and urgings for horses which are used from one end of Russia to the other, every imaginable epithet, whatever happened to come into his head, till it reached the point where he was referring to the horses as bureaucrats. By and by, Chichikov noticed that the carriage was swaying from side to side, giving him a most vigorous jolting. This made him realize that they had turned off the road and were probably lumbering across a plowed field. Cellophane must have realized it too, but he didn't breathe a word. "Hey, you scoundrel, what kind of a road have you got us onto?" Chichikov said. "What can you do, sir, in such weather? Can't see my own whip in this blackness." Whereupon Cellophane caused the carriage to tip so violently that Chichikov had to hold on for dear life. Only then did he notice that Cellophane was drunk. "Hold it! Hold it! You'll upset us!" he shouted. "Oh, no, sir. How could I upset it?" Cellophane said. "I know it isn't right to upset it. No, I won't upset it, whatever happens." And with that, he started slowly turning the carriage. He turned it until finally it turned over altogether. Chichikov found himself with hands and feet in the mud. Cellophane did succeed in stopping the horses, although in fact they'd have stopped by themselves, being quite spent anyway. Such an unexpected development utterly astounded Cellophane. He got down off the box and stood there, arms akimbo, while his master was trying to scramble out of the mud. After a little reflection, he said, "Who'd have thought it? It turned over." "You're drunk as a cobbler," said Chichikov. "Oh, no, sir. How could I be drunk? I know it isn't right to get drunk. Had a chat with a friend, because it's all right to have a chat with a good man. There's nothing wrong in that. And we had a snack together, too. A snack can't do no harm. It's surely all right to have a snack with a good man." "And what did I tell you the last time you got drunk? Huh? Remember?" Chichikov asked. "Yes, Your Excellency. How could I possibly forget? I know my duties. I know it's not good to get drunk. Had a chat with a good man because... You wait. I'll give you a thrashing that'll teach you how to chat with a good man." "Just as your grace pleases." Cellophane was amenable to all suggestions. "If I'm to be thrashed, I'm to be thrashed. I'm not the least bit against it. Why not a thrashing if that's what's needed? If that's what the master wishes? Thrashing's needed because the peasant gets spoiled and order has to be kept. If that's what's needed, then let there be a thrashing. Why not?" His master was quite unable to find an answer to such reasoning, but then fate itself seemed to have taken compassion on him. They heard distant barking. Heartened, Chichikov told him to whip up the horses. The Russian coachman has an instinct that replaces sight, and sometimes his eyes closed tight. He'll go forging ahead, and lo and behold, he'll always arrive somewhere or other. Seeing nothing, Cellophane set his horses on such a straight line for the village that he only stopped when the carriage shaft struck against a fence and there was decidedly nowhere further to go. Through the thick veil of pouring rain, Chichikov could only make out something that looked like a roof. He sent Cellophane to look for the gate, and this undoubtedly would have taken a long time if, in Russia, there weren't savage dogs instead of doormen. These announced his arrival so loudly that Cellophane had to stick his fingers in his ears. A light flashed from a small window, reaching the fence in a misty streamlet that showed our travelers the gate. Cellophane knocked, and soon a wicket was opened, and some kind of a figure in a peasant coat appeared. Master and servant heard a hoarse woman's voice. "Who's that knocking? What's come over you?" "We were driving through," Chichikov said. "May we stay the night?" "Oh, you're a nimble one," the old woman answered. "What a time to come. What do you think this is here, an inn?" "A lady landowner lives here, for your information." "What could we do? We got lost. You don't think we could have spent the night out in the steppe in this weather?" "Yes, it's dark weather, bad weather," Cellophane added. "Quiet, you fool," Chichikov said. "But who are you then?" the old woman asked. "A gentleman." The word gentleman made the old woman stop and think. "Wait, I'll tell my mistress," she said. 2 minutes later, she reappeared with a lantern. The gates were opened. A small light flashed past another window. The carriage drove into the courtyard and stopped in front of a small house, which was difficult to make out in the dark. Only one half of it was lit up by the windows. A puddle in front of the house could also be seen as the light fell directly on it. The rain resounded on the wooden roof and flowed in murmuring streams into a barrel. Meanwhile, the dogs were barking furiously in all sorts of voices. One, throwing up his head, drew out his barking as carefully as if he'd been God knows how highly paid for it. Another chopped off his barks hastily like a sexton. Between them, like a mail wagon bell, rang an indefatigable treble, probably a young puppy. And finally, the whole was topped by a bass, perhaps some patriarch or simply one endowed with a stalwart canine nature, since his voice was rumbling like that of the contrabass in a choir when the concert reaches its climax, and the tenors, anxious to hit a high note, rise on tiptoe and all strive upward, heads thrown back, while he alone squats down, sinks almost to the very ground, burying his unshaven chin in his collar, and hurls forth his note, making the window panes quiver and jar. By the barking alone, produced by such musicians, it was possible to surmise that the village was a sizable one. However, our hero, soaked through and frozen as he was, could think of nothing but bed. Before the carriage had even come to a full stop, he jumped out onto the porch, staggered, and nearly fell. Again, some woman came out onto the porch, younger than the first one, but looking very much like her. She led him inside. Chichikov threw a couple of hasty glances around him. The room was papered with an old striped wallpaper. There were pictures of some birds or other. Between the windows hung small, old-fashioned mirrors with dark frames shaped like curled-up leaves. And behind every mirror a letter had been stuck, or a pack of cards, or a stocking. There was a wall clock with flowers painted on its face. It was beyond his strength to take in more. He felt his eyelids were sticking together, as though someone had smeared them with honey.